Today, we're going to kick off an exciting discussion around leading across generations. So, this is a very hot topic for women business owners, and in our Key for Women series, a pivotal conversation that we will have together about how to improve as a leader. What does it mean managing all of these different kinds of people from all different generations in your workforce? So, first, I want to kick off with a icebreaker. And this, we want you to kind of close your eyes and envision yourself. And what does successful leadership across generations at your organization look like? And a couple of thought questions for you is, what are some of the challenges you experience in managing generations that you would like to improve on? And then contrast that with, what do you wish your team was doing more to engage across the generations? And so what I usually find in my work with women business owners and with leaders across the country is that the challenges we experience are things like different workplace expectations, the perception of flexibility versus being in the office, being seen in the office. And then, when you think about what you wish your team was doing more of, chances are you wish you were able to have, healthier conflict conversations, that you were able to resolve differences of values and perceptions, and that there weren't these kind of nagging conflicts learning with your team. And while some of that has to do with our DISC style that we've talked about, a lot of it has to do with our values. And so we're going to talk about the importance of values today and how that relates to generational theory and the different generations that are in our workforce, because we're at a really pivotal time right now where all three generations are really, really exposed in the workplace, and we're kind of constantly managing across the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and those millennials, which are a lot of fun and interesting challenges in our workplace. So the learning principles that we will cover today in this video and audio series is understanding how coming of age experiences shape generations, learning how to flex your leadership style to meet the values of each generation. So similar to DISC, talking about how does that flex your leadership style. So we can only be, we can choose to communicate differently as leaders. And so how do you flex your style to make sure it lands on your audience the best? And guess what? That's probably going to look a little different across generations. We'll talk about why that is. And then the third piece is aligning your organizational values with your generational values. So depending on the mix of your workforce, if you have a largely millennial workforce, for example, things like collaboration might be much more important versus a baby boomer culture. It might be much more about work ethic and results. So thinking about kind of generalities across the generations, I think you're going to walk away with some key nuggets that you can use in your workforce right away and to seed our Key for Women community discussion. So to define the generations, as there's a lot of different principles and theories about generations out there, what we're going to be referencing is the data from the Pew Research Center. And it basically classifies our generations into three key categories that are active today. Although you will find sometimes there are some traditionalists that were born before 1946 that could still be in the workplace, tend to not be as common, so we won't cover that. More Gen Z that's coming up and starting to enter the workforce, but I tend not to hear as much there yet, although in a few years that will be changing. So first and foremost, the primary generation that's historically been a part of our workforce and shaped our workplace culture and how organizations are run today are the baby boomers. And by definition from the Pew Research Center, they were born from 1946 to 1964. On the flip side of that, kind of as the pendulum swings, we have the millennials, who were born from 1981 to 1997. So these folks are going to be anywhere from kind of mid-career, mid-30s, all the way to your the 20-somethings within your organizations. Baby boomers tend to be in their late 50s, early 60s. And then the Gen X, now born between 1965 and 1980, is what we call the sandwich generation, because they're sandwiched between the big baby boomer generation and the big millennial generation. By sheer size, they tend to be out-dominated by the other generations. But most of the women business owners I work with fall into Gen X. So what does that mean For those of us that are kind of mid to late 30s into our 40s, we're at the pivotal part of our careers, pivotal part of growing our businesses. And so what I usually hear is like, how do I change these pesky millennials, right? Millennials are far less likely to change for us. They are far more likely to change us. Okay, so by sheer size, the millennials will be the dominant part of our workforce. By 2020, they will be the largest part of our workforce. And so thinking about the impact that that has on the workforce, as a lot of their values are going to transcend and translate into our workforce and shape organizations. For better or worse, it's not going to go away. And in all likelihood, the baby boomers are going to retire and be removed from the workforce here in the next decade. That gives Gen X an excellent opportunity to be the next wave of leaders. And I often find we're not developing our Gen X for being this next wave of leaders. So thinking about Gen Xers in your organization, how are you developing them? Because what shapes our generations is really interesting. And so generational theory will say that our coming of age experiences have a huge impact on who we are and what we value. And a lot of that context of the world that we grew up in. And that's especially between the years of 18 and 24. So that's the coming of age kind of time when chances are you're moving out on your own for the first time. Perhaps you're attending college or pursuing an education, your first job. Whatever it is, they have a profound impact on your personal values and belief systems. Those years are extremely pivotal because you're really locking in who you are as a human. So think about the world events, political climate, and experiences you had personally and professionally during this time in your life. What do you remember? What were kind of some key life experiences that shaped who you were between ages 18 and 24? And that's going to be different for each generation. The world looked very different from baby boomers to millennials. And so what I hear often when I talk to baby boomers, they say the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King, I have a dream speech. Those are the things that really stick out to them in those formative coming of age years. When I talk to Gen X, a lot of times they mention the Challenger explosion. A lot of them were in school. It was one of the first times that we saw it alive. Space shuttle be launched and then it explode, and it was very troubling to a lot of young people that saw that in their coming of age time. Such an excitement followed by such crisis. And then for us millennials, I'm right on the cusp actually between Gen X and millennial. But the World Trade Center, I was 19 when that happened. I remember watching the news, the Today Show, and them showing it live, and it was just like, what is going on in the world? And that's a permanent stamp on my memory. Just like baby boomers and Gen Xers will remember, those things that happen in their coming of age time leave a mark on you as a human because you're forming who you are as a human. So translate to that workplace. That leads to our values system. So the experiences that we had shape who we are and what we value. And so I'm going to list off some bullet points and kind of think about what generation this might be. So tend to prefer a strong work ethic, structure and process, respect, recognition of experience, loyalty. Who might that be? You guessed it, the baby boomers, right? And a lot of this has to do with the post-World War II era. A lot of the markings of our culture and organizations today still are very military-esque. Structure, process, chain of command, all of these things were drilled into baby boomers from the 1950s on. And so that led to a strong work ethic and preference for process and structure. Now, compare and contrast that with the other generations. Think about what generation prefers independence, flexibility, trust, coaching, challenges. These are things that the Gen X generation values. They want to be challenged. They want to be trusted. Think about what's going on for Gen X. A lot of times they were called the latchkey kid generation. Independence was huge for these folks. It was the first time both parents worked outside the home primarily. And so a lot of them kind of raised themselves from a young kid. They didn't have parents there after school. The parents like me may have arrived late and let you make dinner for the family while your parents were working. Trusted that your homework done. You were getting in and out of your own house very easily. These kind of things promote a sense of independence, flexibility, and trust. Yet, they're at mid-career where they really want to be challenged and coached to success. Like I said, the next generation of leaders is here. And then what the next generation is, those pesky millennials. I can say that as kind of one. Strong mission and values. They really prefer instant feedback. They love to collaborate, right? Flexible work environments is huge for millennials. They do not understand the 8 to 5 dynamic. And quite frankly, why do we need that in today's technology age? Community impact. They are much more likely to choose a job, choose a position based on the values of the organization and how that work leaves an impact on the world. Much more mission driven in this organization. And they're so used to helicopter parenting and getting instant feedback that they thrive by knowing not just the positives, but also the negatives, constructive feedback. They're hungry for it. They want to know where they stand early and often giving them feedback. And they don't like to work alone. While some of them may be introverted and want some alone time, a lot of times kind of a free flow work environment where you can collaborate, stretch across roles. You don't just have to come in and do the same thing every day. That tends to be not what millennials value or focus on. So when we talk about flexing our leadership styles, it's really important that we translate these values to our leadership style, because we can go in wanting to punch, just kind of baby boomers want to go like beat the other generations into little baby boomers sometimes. Or we can go at it with a we can do it attitude and really rally the troops and show them what good looks like. I often share as a leadership mantra, as leaders, we get to show the team what good looks like. Rather than trying to beat them into change, try to treat them how they want to be treated, right? So flex your leadership style to meet the needs and values of the generations on your team. And organizational values are an excellent way to get there. So we'll talk about this live in our session about how generational values are expectations, beliefs, and behaviors consistent to people who grew up with similar experiences. Organizational values are the non-negotiable behaviors expected in the workplace. They are the hiring criteria. They are the firing criteria. When someone fits or does not fit with the team, chances are it has to do with a lack of cultural alignment. So when these things don't jive, you have generational values that are inconsistent with your organizational values, you're in trouble. And so for organizations that are really wrestling with how to lead across generations, how to balance all of these different diversity variables amongst their people, dialing in on your organizational values and having a candid, robust, collaborative discussion with your team about what are our values, what are our belief system, how are we going to choose how to hire somebody versus not, how are we going to choose how to let somebody go, right? Chances are it has to do with how people believe and what they value. So I just want to share an example with you of an organization I worked with on their organizational values and an activity we can talk about live in person that you can facilitate with your team as a leader. So if you don't already have values, give your team a stack of Post-it notes and have them say, what words would you use to describe our team? How do we behave? What do we believe in? How do we feel? And just categorize. What I did in this activity is categorize all these Post-it notes into common areas that have consistency. So in this example, we had the sparkle rule, and the behaviors below that were, not taking things too seriously, being crass, maybe even irreverent or open-minded. The light bulbs, that was all about innovation. Fuzzy feels was about genuinely caring and being fully invested with the team. We also had something here about the one who is all in, and this was from a problem-solving perspective, about asking questions and being accountable and taking ownership, and also reliability, where it really became a circle of trust, and that was all about doing what you say you'd do. And so these organizational values, when you can get kind of like to 5 to 7 of these, you can really dial in and set your hiring criteria, your firing criteria on these key values, and it becomes very crystal clear for your team how we choose to behave as a team. You want this to be consistent, though, with your generational values. And so if you have values, maybe you haven't touched them for a few years, resurfacing them and having a conversation not just about what your values are, but the behaviors. How do we know when we're behaving consistently with that is so, so, so critical. So things that we will talk about in person that I want you to think about in preparing for our Leading Across Generations Key for Women community exercise is, first and foremost, what are your own coming of age experiences? So we'll do an icebreaker around that. What are your experiences? What do you remember from those key pivotal ages 18 to 24 years? Question 2, how will you flex your leadership style to meet the values of each generation? So what are some of your flexing muscles that you're going to use based on the generational mix that you have in your organization. And then the third learning point is, what do your organizational values look like? And it's okay to bring them kind of raw. Maybe you haven't touched them in a while, or maybe you haven't ever developed them. Give some thought to those values. What are the key behaviors, words that you would use to describe your team? And come prepared to discuss those. And then you'll leave with some actionable tips on how to facilitate that as a conversation around the generations on your team. Look forward to seeing you at the next session.